Matt and JD, 44th FIDE Chess Olympiad 2022. Round number 7 is complete. We're gonna dig into the board number 1 matchup. I think technically it's board 2, but USA against Team Armenia.
Yeah, it was a heck of a match. Or it was a really nice game. It did feature a Caracon, which I'm quite happy about. And I have plenty of critiques for the black player. And how do you say his name again? Because I don't want to try.
I think it's Hrant Melkumian. I haven't practiced it a ton, but he's Armenia's board 2 player. He's rated 2634, and the Armenia team is super strong. Like, he could be board 1 on a lot of teams, of course.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah. I just know that his name's not Bob or John, and thus I can't pronounce it.
That's all right. Here we go with e4, and then we see the Caro Kann, c6. And this is something that I've seen a lot recently, JD. Everyone seems to be playing the 2 knights. Like, I'm getting this all the time in my games. I don't know
Yeah,
about
me
you.
too. Yeah, me too, for sure. Me too.
And I
So
think
knight
the
f3, and then here black makes his first blunder.
bishop to
Plays bishop to
g4.
g4, which is, I don't really care that it's the most common move by twice the margin. It's a blunder because you're supposed to take, and when they play knight takes, you play knight f6, and you're hoping to transpose to the Tartakower. Although most people against me these days are playing this queen e2 line. This seems to be the most common thing, and they're hoping that I'll just willy-nilly develop and give up this mate, which I'm ashamed to admit I've fallen for once.
I fell for it one time as well. It was a while ago, but yeah, it was like my quickest loss.
Yeah, yeah. But bishop g4, and bishop g4 is a clear idea. The point is, I want to play e6, and then I'm going to get rid of this bishop, and I have a super solid chain, and my bishop is not stuck behind it, which is the problem in a lot of these kinds of openings. So, it makes sense. And
But it does
so,
give white kind of that just real slight advantage going forward. White gets that long-term bishop pair advantage, and I think we see a nice version of that from Wesley in this game.
yeah, I agree. I agree. So, but e6, the idea, just saying I'm going to be super solid. And then Wesley with a little bit of an offbeat approach with this bishop e2.
Yeah, I think this was the 3rd most popular move in the database, um, but it's still just as good as the other moves, I think. And after bishop c5, castle, knight d7, we see kind of the first interesting point in the game. Wesley decides to capture on d5, and there's 2 recaptures, and they're pretty much equally good depending on what you look at in the stats.
Yeah, I guess black has to make a decision here. Do I want a symmetrical position where I'm probably going to be solid and maybe hold a draw? Or do I want to try to off balance it a little bit and see if we can get something non symmetrical and give yourself better chances for a win, I suppose? And
It's
he chooses the off balance approach, going into a Carlsbad structure, which we may or may not have seen a few times in their recent videos.
yeah, my favorite pawn structure. I am surprised, based on the match dynamics, usually teams want draws with black and wins with white. But maybe it's because they knew that they were lower on all 4 boards. Like you talked about last time, board 4 for the US Sam Shanklin is about 22 points higher rated than Armenia's board 1. So maybe they're thinking we got to go for the wins where we can. Don't worry about that match strategy draw with black. Because, yeah, now we get this Carlsbad, not the symmetric pawn structure.
Yeah. So we get rook d1, clearly indicating that white intends to play d4.
Mm-hmm.
And just a simple knight development and d4. And then here, an interesting decision on where you want to drop the bishop back. For me, I thought bishop d6 felt the most natural, but notice white has the bishop pair and wants to open the position up for those bishops. And just knight b5, I want to keep my bishop and c4. And the position's opening up. The king's still in the middle. White has the bishop pair and somewhat of a lead in development. So I think perhaps this is why he wanted to avoid this bishop to d6 idea, and instead goes bishop back to e7. So after bishop to e7, if we try to do something similar, we don't play knight b5 with tempo. So for example, let's say we just play knight b5 anyway, and we give kind of a random move here. I guess that's not so random. I don't know. We'll say b3. But now when c4 happens, it's going to be a bit faster to get to the d4 pawn. And because the bishop's not on e7, the queen's already open. I gave some pretty terrible moves there for white, but
I think no, there's a really nice play here by black. If knight b5, it doesn't attack the bishop. You actually get this
Hmm.
super quick a6, kicking the
Yeah.
knight out, and there's not a good square for the knight. a3 or c3, it doesn't matter too much. You can play b5 in both cases, and now you get this real quick minority attack and both pawns hitting c4. So I think that's why bishop e7 is a good move because there's no knight b5 with tempo.
Yeah, and I mean it does allow you. It makes it harder for white to achieve this c4 move. Is I think the main point.
Yeah.
So after bishop to e7, uh, Wesley says, "Well, my bishop belongs on d3 in the Carlsbad," and it seems like he knows exactly where his pieces belong in the Carlsbad because he makes a a second move with the bishop, putting it where it belongs. And this knight does not belong on c3, and we're going to see it doesn't take Wesley long to maneuver that guy out of the way too. We get castles. The bishop comes out. The knight drops back because it was a little awkward here and is probably going to come back out to c6, which is a much more natural square. And yeah, we move this knight out of the way and play c3. And now both players have recognized that they're in a Carlsbad structure and have corrected all of their pieces to match the pawn structure they're in, which I think is a really kind of funny way that they've handled the game.
Yeah, it feels like they're 2 or 3 moves behind when you would normally be in this position. But I think white has a good version of the Carlsbad structure. It just feels like with this easy bishop pair, the knight already coming to the king side, and really nothing has gotten going for black with either the a6 b5 plan or the f6 e5 plan that we see in our Caro Kann course. So I kind of like white here already. What do you think?
I think so too, and I think maybe the crux of it is that you often in this exchange variation do get the bishop out to g4, but you generally don't take on f3. So it's kind of like that we've played an exchange Caro Kann, but white somehow induced black to take on f3, and I think that's probably where the main difference from a traditional Caro Kann Carlsbad type structure is coming. So the rook comes to e8, and it's clear that black has already kind of settled on his plan. He's going to go for this e5 break instead of the minority attack. Presumably, he realizes that there's going to be a kingside attack coming and wants to try to strike in the center because that's much faster. Faster plan. I think he doesn't have a choice.
Yeah, another nice thing about playing rook to e8 is this bishop can come back to f8, guarding the g7 square. So it's kind of a dual purpose move. You can be ready for e5 or bring the bishop back to defend. We see rook
Yeah,
e1 by So, pawn to g6. What do you think of this move, pawn to g6, kind of opening up the dark squares around the king?
I think it's a difficult decision to make because I think that I'm sure that he's already quite afraid uh, of the king side attack, and so he's already trying to set up some defensive squares. Like maybe he's thinking that he wants to be able to move this knight and is worried about some sort of Greek gift with the queen coming to h5, or maybe he just thinks that this is the best way to try to shut down the white attack.
And it's a slight mistake. I mean, I understand like you see white's pressure coming. Knight g3, knight h5, bishop hitting h7. Like you want to try to guard against everything, but this is a slight mistake. So let's see how So capitalizes. He starts with knight to g3, and after knight to d7, we looked at this move pretty intensively. Rook to e3. What do we think about this?
Well, at first, like it seems sort of strange because it's not sure where the rook is actually gonna go.
Hmm.
Uh, but it seems like the plan is just to double. We normally to see these rook lifts, you think the rook's gonna slide across, but like that's a lot of moves from now before that rook could slide across. And I think that perhaps he's taking advantage of this g6 move because he's lining up against e5. Um, and there are definitely some ideas in the position where we're going to sacrifice on e6 and then sacrifice something on g6, and and taking advantage of the fact that g6 has been played and sort of weakening the squares a bit.
And JD and I looked at a line with queen to g4, and this is just craziness. Let's give black a random move just to show a potential sacrifice in the position. There's rook takes e6, and if f takes e, bishop takes g6, h takes g, queen takes g6. Now, this particular line is a draw with best play, perpetual check, but white just sacrificed rook and bishop for a couple of pawns. So this just kind of shows like the type of tactics that are in the air and how quickly white can destroy this black pawn structure.
Yeah, so rook e3 play, and we get e5, which e5 is quite an interesting move and leads to a lot of dynamic play. It turns out that like Wesley So here, like he goes into like the Eric Rosen approach and just starts setting traps because like the move that he plays, bishop h6, is really not the best move. He's inducing this e4 idea, which we'll look at that in a second. The best is probably just to take. And this is going to allow the bishop to come out to c5. He's going to get the pawn back. We need to move out of the way, most likely. Actually, e6 is an interesting idea because if you take, you can't really take here because I'm going to take this guy. The rook's got to move. I'm going to get several pieces. So this would be an interesting way and probably the best way to play. But he plays this bishop to h6, and black falls for it. He just goes straight down and e4. I mean, it's really hard not to play this, but this line of why you can't play this is incredible. And Wesley So solid. He plays rook takes e4, the first of like many sacrifices to come. And it seems like you could just take the rook, but it turns out you absolutely cannot take the rook. If you do, which didn't happen in the game, we followed up with queen sack. Okay, only move. If you hide in the corner, you're going to get mated. So the king comes out, bishop check. This is almost that scissor, that scissoring the Bowden's mate. That one's called. So the king comes out to f6. We give another check. King comes forward. We've already sacked a rook. We already sacked a queen. What's a knight? So we're going to sack a knight instead. And we bring the last rook into the game. Notice the bishops are doing, both bishops are doing a great job just creating a wall for the so it's forced to go to f3, and then we have our choice between rook e3, or I think the prettier bishop d5 mate. And then all this completely forced. Just an amazing mate, and shows why this rook cannot be taken. They both clearly saw this. It's just that Wesley saw it one move earlier, and that proves to be the difference. So he's just up a clean pawn now.
And that mate was pretty amazing because it was a 14-point material differential. Like, when do you see a checkmate like that with the black king walking all the way to f3? So it really impresses me, like, just how tactically strong Wesley is to see all of that in advance. There's a lot of other tactics to look at, just like the line you showed. You know, strongest move here is probably to take the pawn, but there's a lot of tactics in this line. Like, dropping the rook back is an advantage for black. So you got to figure out all that nonsense with e6 and the exchange sack and taking the knight and blah, blah, blah. Wesley's got this all figured out. And the way he baited his opponent was just brilliant with bishop to h6 and rook takes e4.
Yeah, for sure. The knight drops back to f8, and the rook just scoots over. Instant pressure on f7, and we get another mistake immediately. Just
Knight,
playing f5, which seems natural, and Wesley stacks another piece.
yeah, knight takes f5. And what's happening here is all of these black pawns are disappearing, right? So we looked at those sacks earlier. Once you get rid of the pawns in front of your opponent's king, then other tactics start to open up, and there's going to be a lot of checkmate threats for white coming up.
Yeah, so now, I mean, so technically Wesley sacked a piece, but he's already got 3 pawns for it. So he's actually already happy materially. The queen d6 happens, just struggling to try to get a piece to come help defend, and then queen g4 comes.
So let's say queen to g6. In the game, knight g6 was played. This would be my first instinct. Can I get away with queen g6 and offer up the queen trade straight away?
And it turns out you can't, because there's just rook takes f8, and you're going to lose your queen.
Ouch. Okay, so he did knight g6.
Yeah, knight g6, but I mean, that's really not any better, because now we get this super impressive. He's already sacked this rook once, and he's going to sack it again.
This one's just amazing. I mean, how do you see this? I would assume that they're probably low on time at this point after calculating all the other lines. But if queen takes d5, only move for white, bishop takes g6, and black is completely busted. If you take here, there's the mate in 2. Just move here, move back. And if you don't take this bishop, there's actually no good moves for black at all. What would you play as black here? Or resign?
I mean, we looked at bishop g5 because that seemed like it's the most challenging, because it doesn't allow this bishop to move with check, but it allows this bishop can still move with a serious threat to bishop to c2. my threat is to come here to b3, and I'm looking to attack this guy. And so you've got to move the king or the rook or do something to prevent that. And then you just lose your bishop. And once you've lost this bishop, you have an exchange, but you're down 4 pawns. So white is up a massive amount of material and still attacking. So bishop to g5 is kind of the best we could come up with after you take the rook. And it seems like the black saw that and decided that's not worth it. So doesn't take the rook. So twice now, Wesley has offered up an impossible to capture rook.
And then he shifts gears here and just calmly plays pawn to g3, but it's still a good move. It's actually slowing down some of the stuff that black is trying to play, and he's ready to play rook to f5 next. And black doesn't really have a great move here again.
No, it's hard. The black played the best move, coming back to bishop to f8, just trying to get rid of this bishop. And this bishop would never be here if it hadn't been for that g6 maneuver. I just want to point that out.
That is true. Now rook to f5 is played, attacking the
Rook
queen.
to f5. Yeah.
She moves, and now we see bishop to c4 check. So if you count the attackers, white has 4 attackers on the position. Black kind of has 3 defenders, right? So black is close to being able to hold this, but the problem is there's no light squared bishop for black, and there's no knight that can block this diagonal. So white's really taking advantage of his bishop pair advantage here.
Yeah, also would want to point out that white doesn't even need to mate anymore. He has 4 pawns for the piece.
Good point.
So already up material.
Yeah, we lose track, but he's +1 currently and about to win more.
Yeah, so yeah, king h8 is played, and now just bishop g5, and black resigns. Perhaps a bit of an early resignation, because it's not immediately obvious where you're getting beat at, but perhaps he was tired of rook sacks. So we looked at a line that tries to save the queen here, and tried, for example, like queen d6, but now rook f6 comes in, just creeping ever so more closely. Queen to c7, rook comes to c8, and if again you've got to give up. All along here, white had the opportunity, or black had the opportunity to give up the queen, and that was always the best move.
Queen sack, yeah.
Yeah, that was always the best move, but it's just not a human way to play. So if you try to exchange the queens here, well, now we get a rook sack again, and this one you can't decline.
Yep, so king takes, queen to h5 check, and if the king goes to g7, we have not that move, but queen to h6 checkmate. So
that was a Sam Shanklin move there.
Yeah, well, it's funny when you said this seemed early for black to resign. I was thinking, maybe there was some sort of deal made between the two teams. On board 4, we're not showing that game today, but Sam Shanklin actually resigned in a drawn position. So how did the match end up between the top 2 teams, Armenia and US?
Caruana got crushed. Wesley So crushed. Dominguez somehow managed to re-win a 1 game. He was up +5, made a crazy looking move that I don't understand. The correct move to me seemed like the most obvious move, and he didn't play it. And then somehow he managed to win anyway. And then Shanklin resigned in a drawn position. So the match ended up as a draw, which, man, I don't know.
And we were kind of talking about the US players so far, and I have it up on the screen. We have the performance ratings right here. So Fabiano, board number 1, he's rated 2780. His performance rating is 2578, so he's underperforming by 200 points. Levon, 2637, he's underperforming by 150. Wesley and Lanier are performing about their ratings, and Sam Shanklin is actually underperforming by 250 points. So 3 of our 5 players, are kind of disappointing at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we in our preview, we talked about how they outrated every other team on an average of about 100 rating points. And well, that doesn't mean anything if you're going to underperform by 200-300 rating points.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the full standings. After round number 7, we have 1 team in clear first, Armenia. And if I drill into that team, and look at their performance ratings, their whole team is pretty much outperforming or at their ratings, right? So they're doing how you'd expect them to do or slightly better because they're the 12 seed going into this event.
Yeah, I still though have pretty high hopes for the US's team to finish things out. I mean, they're still tied for second, and I don't really believe in slumps and streaks. I believe that we should see a regression to the mean, to
Mhm.
throw out a good term, and I expect that we'll see stronger performances from Shanklin and from Aronian and from Caruana here on out.
I think you're right. I mean, we do still have 8, 9, 10, 11, 4 more rounds, and the top teams are going to keep battling against each other. So the ratings should pan out on average. I agree with you. I think the US is easily in striking distance of Armenia. And the way to read this table, by the way, is if it says 13 for tiebreak one, that means 6.5 points out of 7. A win counts as 2, draw counts as 1. So we got a 1 with 6.5. These teams all have 6. How are your other teams faring so far?
Well, I wanted to point out that Gukesh won again. So he's on a 7 game streak. He's almost, in some ways, matched the Caruana streak from Sinkfield 2013. Was that when Caruana went on the tear?
Yeah, it was either
So,
13 or 14 right before the championship.
yeah, that was so Gukesh is super, super impressive.
Do you know his
Serbia
performance
got,
rating so far?
yeah, it's outrageous. It's like
33,
33.
35.
Yeah, insane, insane. Germany beat Serbia. Iceland won again today. So I guess I'm happy with that, with how the results have gone. How did India versus India go for you?
India beat India 3. Not too surprising. And I think we will see India against India 2 coming up soon. It's got to be in one of these rounds coming up because I think they're both going to continue to play well.
Magnus, of course, won again today, but I don't think Norway fared all that well as a whole.
Yeah, Norway's been slipping a little bit. They're actually
Yeah,
down in.
Magnus is on pace though to get a gold medal for the individual board though. He's still in the runnings anyway.
It's got to beat
So,
Gukesh.
although, honestly, the fact that the rest of his team is like sucking actually helps his chances to win a gold medal, an individual gold medal. Because if his team's losing, they're going to play worse and worse teams, which means that on his board ones, he's playing lower and lower rated players
Yeah.
and improves his odds of winning his individual board. So if Magnus's strategy was to win an individual gold and not a team gold, his team's really doing a lot to support him in that.
That's a good point. And he might be kind of going for his 2,900 goal too because his performance so far, 29-27. So he's playing over
Yeah.
2,900 level.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if he makes it. I hope he does.
All right,
So
let's look at the round 8 pairings. Now we have board number 1, Armenia against India 1, and board number 2, United States against India 2. And one team that's really been surprising me so far is Uzbekistan. They're on board 3 against Germany, and they actually have um, 23 individual game points so far. I believe that's the highest in the whole tournament. So pretty impressed by those guys, and they're going to be on board 3.
do you think we'll see? Do you think Caruana will stop the Gukesh train?
Mm, it's a very good question. I'm going to say Gukesh wins.
I'm going to go on record and say that Caruana is going to, at the very least, draw. I'll take the other two results. You can have
That's a
win for
safe
Gukesh,
bet. Draw is such a
and I'll
safe
take
bet.
and I'll take the other two results.
All right, would you give me 10-1?
10-1. Yeah,
I
I'll
don't
give you
know the
10-1.
colors, but
Yeah, I don't know the colors either, but yeah, I'll give you 10-1 on that.
all right. We'll see what happens.
I
India
think we're going to see two regressions to the mean. Those means are regressing in the opposite directions.
That's true. That's true. How is Gukesh looking in the live ratings? Have you checked that?
He's gained like almost 30 points.
Oh, he's 25th now. 27-23. Yeah, he's gained 24 points, and Caruana has lost 16 points. He's down to 10th
Yeah.
in the overall.
Yeah, I wish that so Caruana is at probably like his like 5 year like low, and
Mm-hmm.
he's still number 10 in the world. I really wish that my 5 year low were number 10 in the world.
Yeah, that would be a nice problem to have. I
It
do
would,
think
wouldn't
the
it?
I think the US team is missing Hikaru. I really he's very experienced, and I feel like him and Kamsky always kind of showed up for these events, played well.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're kind of missing him.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
All right, so that concludes round number 7. We will be back tomorrow for the round 8 recap. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys then.